So, everyone, thank you yet again for showing up for PhreakNIC and for being willing to sit in this room and listen to me bitch about shit. Before I actually provide my, so obviously a lot of interesting things have happened over the past couple months that are somewhat relevant to the comments that I may or may not have made at this conference over the long period of time that I have been speaking here. But before I talk about those things, I have this other comment that I need to make. I need to ask the audience for. No, I got one, man, but it's good to have a backup. Excellent, thank you, sir. I want to talk about something else. So I think that Lawrence Lessig, who created Creative Commons, has started this group called Root Strikers. And Root Strikers, basically, their slogan is that for everyone hacking at the branches of evil, there are very few that are striking at the root. Okay, and his context for that observation is the idea that the root of the problem is that our democratic process is broken, that the politicians that we are electing are not necessarily responsive to the people anymore. And the reason for that is that it's very expensive to run for office. If you're going to run for office, you have to raise money. Fortunately, it is not the case that there is a direct correlation between the amount of money that you spent and your probability of being elected. But there is some baseline that you have to reach in order to be a viable candidate, and that baseline is very high. And so in order to reach that, and unfortunately there's sort of like an arms race thing where that baseline keeps going higher and higher. And so in order to reach that baseline, you have to go out and raise money from wealthy donors who are investing in controlling the government. Even when you get into office, your first day, you're picking up the phone to start raising money again for your next election, or you're not going to get reelected. And so the reality is that money has a huge influence on what our political system consists of. And so the question is, what can we do about that? And I think that we need to teach people to try to evaluate candidates on a more objective basis. The reality is that there are multiple candidates that might show up on your ballot, and you should look into that before you show up to vote. And you should spend some time researching all of those candidates so that you can make a decision about who you're going to vote for. And in order to do that, you need objective information resources, and you need to use them. So a couple of years ago at PhreakNIC, I started this thing called Wiki Voter Guide. I announced this thing here. A Wiki Voter Guide is basically, if you go to our website, you can put in your ZIP+4, and we'll tell you who's running for office in your next election. And then you can click on their names and get their Wikipedia profile. So people can use Wikipedia to document different politicians running for office. And so and I think that, in spite of all of the drama around Wikipedia, that it actually does a good job providing factual information about things. So I think it is a good resource, and it's a resource that is not controlled by a particular person's agenda, although it can be hijacked. And there's actually there's another piece of Wiki Voter Guide that has to do with trying to protect the users of Wikipedia from vandalism, but that's a long topic that I'm not going to get into, and it's also another talk I did at PhreakNIC a few years ago. Anyway, so I don't know. Recent events have caused me to be even more cynical and jaded about politics than I was originally, and I'll talk about that. I still think that Wiki Voter Guide has some potential in terms of creating a resource that people can use to research political elections and to retrain the way that people think. It's really about, if we want a different kind of country, it's really about us, and it's not about the process. We have to change the way that we approach things, we being everybody. But we've got to find out what the right model is for people to follow, and we've got to provide a way for them to follow. So I'm running this thing, and I set it up as a 501(c) public charity, and you can actually, so in theory, if someone were to donate money to me, no one has ever done that, they could write that donation off as a tax deduction, and I have a tax ID number. And I actually, so here's the problem. In order to retain my 501(c) status, I have to raise a certain amount of money from the public. And I actually haven't bothered to do that because I'm funding everything and it's not very expensive for me to do what I'm doing. But I have to if I'm going to retain that status, and that status could be important for things that I will continue to do in the future. So I know this is lame, but I'm going to send around a collection cup. If you have a couple bucks and you understand Wiki Voter Guide and you're willing to continue to support my efforts, it would really be appreciated because if I can tell the IRS that I am in fact raising money from the public, then they will continue to allow me to be a public charity. And if you want to make a tax-deductible donation and you want my EIN number, you can talk to me after the talk and I will give it to you. And let me explain what your money goes to. Your money goes to the hosting costs for Wiki Voter Guide.
There's enough money.
And some of it will also be donated to Project VoteSmart. Project VoteSmart is a very important nonprofit charity that has they hire a bunch of interns who actually go out and document people that are running for office in different districts all across the country. And they create a central database of all of this information about who's running for office. So it's a really great objective resource about who's running for office. And they had an endowment that they were operating under, and they gave all of it to Bernie Madoff. And so Bernie Madoff was running a pyramid scheme, and he lost all of the money that was being used to operate Project VoteSmart. So they are in a bad financial position. So a percentage of the money that I am collecting will go to Project VoteSmart. Any additional money that we have above our expenses will go to Project VoteSmart, and Project VoteSmart is a very important resource. So anyway, that's my pre-remarks. There's a couple of people who put their hands up, so I'm going to stop for a second before I actually start ranting.
Yeah, just really, really fast.
Yeah.
On your 501c3, sounds like you're a public charity. You got to pass the 2/3 test within the first 5 years. So
That's
more
right.
of your 5 years need to be 2/3 from the public and 1/3 from you, or you'll become a private foundation.
That's right.
Just wanted to point that out to everybody.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. That's exactly right. And this is year 4, I think. I hope it's not year 5. I think it's year
Yeah.
4. So I really got to get going on
Yeah.
actually raising revenue from the public, and I'm not doing that yet. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate your help. And I'm sorry to have to do that, but I think that it is a potentially important project. And furthermore, if you really think it's interesting and you have time, please talk to me because I have done a fair amount of work on it, but I could really use help, particularly if you're a good web designer or you're interested in politics. So definitely the door is open for people who have time and are interested in working on that project. So anyway, thank you very much for that. I'm now going to talk about, oh God, what is this?
It's power.
Knowledge.
Peaches.
Pineapple flavor. It's something else. So it's got vitamin C in it, probably. Sea turtles.
Peach orgasm.
So that's delicious. Somebody was giving me shit earlier because I was on the USA Today at Black Hat briefings, and I got quoted talking about the fact that General Alexander, who runs Cyber Command in the NSA, spoke at Black Hat. And I said that I was glad that he was there. And I got quoted on that in the USA Today, so somebody was giving me hell about it. And so I want to start with that. And of course I gave a very long interview to the USA Today, and they only used a snippet. But I am glad that he was there. I think that, notwithstanding, of course there are people who have a point of view that, we need a radically different kind of system than we currently have. Right now, I would simply be satisfied if we actually have the system that we supposedly have, okay? And the system that we supposedly have involves things like having a military, and it involves things like having the NSA. Obviously, we have to have the NSA under the context of the system that we currently have. It makes sense that that organization exists, and it's good that those people are interested in being engaged with our community. Back in the early days of this community was considered a thorn in the side of everyone. And we're all a bunch of criminal hackers, right? So, establishment interests were not interested in engaging with us. We're not interested in recruiting from this community. But I think that the community has matured significantly over the past 20 years. I think there's a lot of people in this community that are involved in computer security professionally and are often on the same side of the trenches. Oh my. So a lot of these people in this community are on the same side of the trenches as the NSA, particularly with respect to things like cyber espionage. So it's good that the NSA recognizes that, and they're interested in engaging with this community, and they want to have a good relationship. They want to have partnerships. At the same time, I think that the establishment, although they recognize the value of this community, does not understand why this community is valuable. And I think this is really important. And I think that there's been this, there's this constant thing that everyone brings up that if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to hide. Okay, right, which we laugh at that. But I don't know if we've done an effective job at discrediting that point of view. It keeps being brought up. People genuinely don't understand why that is a problem. And I think that it relates to the fact that the establishment doesn't understand why this community is valuable. This community is not valuable because people in this community are more technically skilled than people in other places. That is bullshit. If we have a university system in this country that produces PhDs who are extremely technically skilled. It is not simply a factor of technical skill. It is a matter of perspective. The people in this community are valuable because they are technically skilled, but more so because they look at the problem from a different point of view. And it is the coupling of technical skill with the ability to have a unique perspective that really creates value and really makes the things that come out of this community interesting and valuable to people like the NSA. So where does that perspective come from? And that perspective comes from our ability to stand outside of the norms of acceptable social behavior, frankly. I tend to think of, so my favorite hacker is Steve Wozniak. I think he's someone who exemplifies everything that is great about this community. And Steve Wozniak is a prankster, and he likes to find a way to stand in a place that people don't think exists, just to see how they react. I'll give you an example. He would go to the Bureau of Printing and Engraving, which is on the mall in Washington, D.C. You go there, and you can see them print money, and then you can buy these books of uncut bills of various denominations, including $2 bills. So you can buy a book with sheets of perforated, uncut $2 bills from these people at a significant premium over the face value. But being a millionaire, you can go and buy these books. And then he'll buy the book and then walk down the street to the McDonald's. And he'll go in and he'll order his lunch. And then he'll attempt to pay by providing sheets of uncut $2 bills. Just to see how people react. And, a normal person wouldn't have thought to do something like that. What Steve Wozniak's talent is to identify things that he can do, or places that he can be, or things that he can be, that people don't expect or don't think are possible. It's kind of like a magician. And in fact, sometimes it's just good for a laugh. But sometimes by standing in those places, you can see things that other people couldn't see that are incredibly important. And that's really what Steve Jobs has given the world. By standing in these places, he's seen opportunities for innovation that have had a tremendous impact on the world that we've all experienced. And that's, I think, a large part of what we all try to do by participating in this community. We try to find those places where we can see the world from a different perspective. Now, there are, so think about social behavior. There's a line in the sand, right, between what is socially acceptable behavior, what is normal behavior, and behavior that is not socially acceptable, behavior that is not normal, okay? So that's a line. There's also a line between behavior that is legal and behavior that is illegal, right? So that's a line. And then we also know that there's another line between behavior that is not malicious and behavior that is malicious, behavior that is inherently evil or bad, right? And we know that these three lines are in different places sometimes. So, obviously there's a desire to make them the same, but it's complicated. So often there is a distinction between behavior that is socially acceptable, behavior that is legal, and behavior that is malicious. All right, so to give you an example, smoking marijuana is a great example. Smoking marijuana is not malicious. Smoking marijuana does not inherently harm people, but it is illegal. So it exists in the space between what is inherently malicious and what is illegal. There are many things that might exist in the space between what is so they might be legal, but they might not be socially acceptable. So, for example, being a homosexual is legal, fortunately, but it is not necessarily socially acceptable. So, in society's desire to control or prevent malicious behavior. Often this legality line is drawn in different places. Sometimes behavior which is not inherently malicious is nonetheless illegal. And it's illegal because society is trying to prevent people from doing things that are harmful. And in fact, society often has a hard time differentiating between behavior that they consider unacceptable, strange, or not normal, and behavior that they want to control or prohibit out of their fear of things that are harmful or evil. Okay? So if you think about that structure, the reality is that someone like Steve Wozniak and many of the people in this community are people who live their lives in this space that is outside of what is normal or what is socially acceptable, but is often inside of what is legal and clearly inside of what is harmful or malicious. And so when you live life in that space, you have a great deal to fear, because society does not do a good job telling the difference between you and someone who is actually dangerous. And many of our society's attempts to control behavior that is threatening end up impacting everyone who is outside the world of what is socially acceptable. Civil liberties are the scaffolding that hold open this space, okay? You have a democracy. In a democracy, the majority has the power to decide what policies they want, and the majority is going to prohibit everything that is socially unacceptable unless they're prevented from doing so. A civil liberty is a check against the power of the majority. It constrains the majority's ability to prohibit things that are not harmful but may be socially unacceptable. Consider the right to freedom of speech. The right to freedom of speech only comes into play when the majority wants to ban something. And the right to freedom of speech protects your rights to say that thing and to stand in that place that is socially unacceptable in spite of the fact that the majority wants to control it. That's the function of civil liberties. They create this space that hackers live in, that this community lives in, and that community, because of the unique perspective that comes from living in that space, is able to see opportunities for innovation that have a tremendous impact on our world. Okay, our ability to do what we do, the power of this community and the impact that it has, comes from its perspective, which is a perspective that depends upon civil liberties for its existence. And that's something that I don't think, and so the reality is that if we see civil liberties being removed, if we see the space between what is legal and what is socially acceptable beginning to close, what we find ourselves in is a position where our world is certainly threatened, and where we do have something to hide. And in fact, if our world is destroyed, there's a whole lot of value that gets eliminated with it. There are a whole lot of babies that got thrown out with that bathwater. So since 9/11, we have had a number of things happen that have changed the way that civil liberties function within our society. Before I continue, I am going to take a drink. And I want to make this an interactive discussion, because I think that we all have something to process here with what we've been through in the past couple of months. But these are the things that came to my mind that concern me, that are new. U.S. citizens detained without charge.
I just wanted to complicate the way you presented the space of socially acceptable, illegal, and malicious, to point out that there are activities that are definitely malicious, that are not only legal but are also socially acceptable.
That's a great point.
Like overdraft fees that banks charge, for example.
Yes, absolutely. So
overdraft fees.
I sort of set up a structure where this line's here, and this line is here, but the fact is that these lines cross each other and all over the space.
It's a Venn diagram, obviously.
Yeah. So, no, thank you for making that point. That's an excellent point. So, U.S. citizens detained without charge. Some of these issues have been resolved, sort of. Some of them have not been resolved. Okay, the U.S. Government engaging in torture of suspected terrorists. A due process-free no-fly list where someone can decide that you're not traveling anymore and you don't really have anything you can say about that to fix it if you are not who they think you are. Suspicion searches of electronics at border crossings. Back in the 1970s, if you went across the border with sealed mail, they had to get a warrant to open it. But now, if you go across the border with your laptop, they don't even need to establish a reason to suspect you before they take the device away from you and send it for forensic analysis. Warrantless wiretapping, we had a debate about that. Business record surveillance, we're now having a debate about that. Some of these issues sort of have been resolved. So U.S. citizens detained without charge. So there's this guy, Jose Padilla, they detained him at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, not on a battlefield. They detained him without charges for like 4 years, maybe 6. And they went through this whole process where there were people challenging his detention and went through the whole court system, got up to the Supreme Court, and surprise, they moved him, so you're in the wrong jurisdiction. And so they went through the process again, and they got up to the Fourth Circuit Appellate Court, and the Fourth Circuit Appellate Court came up with this elaborate theory, which I kind of think of as the, it's sort of the, it's like a cartoon where, there's a chase happening in a cartoon, and first they're flying airplanes, and then they're driving cars, and then they're, running on foot. The idea is that, like, this guy was on the battlefield at some point, and so, he could have been chased elaborately from the battlefield and ended up in Chicago O'Hare Airport where he was detained. That's not actually what happened, but that was the theory of the Fourth Circuit when they decided it was okay. That theory was going to go to the Supreme Court, and the Bush administration wisely decided not to have that reviewed by the Supreme Court because they were going to get their asses handed to them, and so they decided to go ahead and finally charge Jose Padilla with a crime. I hope that dude is guilty. His brain was more or less mush by the time he came out of detention, and they convicted him on the basis of the fact that there was a piece of paper that he had signed that had his fingerprints on it, which if you're cynical, you might argue could have been passed to him at any point during his detention. Hopefully he really is guilty because they certainly detain him for forever.
What did they charge him with?
I guess so. That piece of paper was him signing up to join Al Qaeda. I guess that it's kind of bizarre to think of them keeping paperwork for that, but apparently they did. And so allegedly, like we raided some camp in Afghanistan and found this paperwork, and so he had signed up. And so some material support for a terrorist organization is what they charged him. Anyway, the fundamental problem here is that this is a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil who is detained without charges. And in our system, you're supposed to have charges when you detain someone. And it's little comfort that 6 years later they eventually charged him with a crime. It means that they can detain you for at least 6 years without charges. Now, there have been other rules. No other U.S. citizen, as far as I know, was detained without charges. So obviously, like, they have decided not to do that in general as a policy. But it creates a somewhat disconcerting precedent for the future. Sir?
Drone without charges?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Just
Under 18? U.S. citizen?
That's an excellent point. I said, what else? Can you hold that thought? I'll get there.
Sure.
So there's torture. So Obama clearly ran on a platform of I'm going to change some of the things that are happening around here, right?
I'm glad no yes.
I'll be here all week. So he argues that he has stopped the U.S. from torturing detainees, which he might have done. I don't know if they have any detainees they want to torture right now, so maybe it's easy to do that. I don't know.
Always wanted to torture a detainee.
Hopefully that issue has been resolved. Due process free no-fly list still exists. If somebody doesn't like you, they can put you on the no-fly list, and you're more or less fucked. You can argue there is a whole group of people who have a class action lawsuit about this, and they're all You know, I'm such and such. I'm filing this lawsuit. If I was part of Al Qaeda, I probably wouldn't be doing that. They're going to have to go through the whole process in order to get some adjudication of this. So the U.S. government can essentially prevent you from traveling without due process of law. Yes.
And that no-fly list is filtering down into other areas. I think it's New Jersey that recently passed a law saying that if you're on the no-fly list, you can't legally buy a gun.
Oh yeah, right. So it becomes this due process-free blacklist that they can maintain that is not public. We don't know what it is. Like so in the context of export law, there's a blacklist of people that you can't do business with, but everyone knows who's on that blacklist, and there's a process for removing people if you want to. This is different because the list itself is a secret, and there doesn't appear to be a clear process for removing people's names. Suspicionless searches of electronics at borders. I mentioned before, like back in the 70s, don't let anyone tell you that it's always been that way, because it hasn't been that way. Because first of all, people didn't have fucking laptops 20 years ago. And secondly, the amount of data that people are carrying with them is categorically different from the way it was before. And secondly, the rules have actually changed. Whether the constitutional issues are the same or not, the rules have been radically modified. So that the customs agents can actually physically destroy things that you own without suspicion, without any reason to think that you've done anything wrong. Sir.
Your old argument that gas tanks have gasoline.
That's right. Gas tanks. So right. The case where they physically destroyed something was where somebody had a bunch of weed in their gas tank in their car. And so they drilled in, somehow they knew, they claimed that they had no reason to suspect that this person was doing anything wrong, and they randomly decided to drill into their gas tank, and lo and behold, there was weed there. And so maybe they knew because the NSA tipped them off. Who the fuck knows? But their argument was that we can drill into people's gas tanks without suspicion. And the court upheld this. And their argument was, well, typically people have gasoline in their gas tank, and if it so happened that the customs agent saw your gasoline, that would not be a significant privacy incursion. So it's really not that big of a deal. And I think that I can accept that conclusion, but the problem is that people have interpreted that conclusion as being sort of like the gate is now open for any kind of destruction of any physical property in the context of crossing the border because there could be no privacy consequence that would matter. And that sort of rationalization, I think, is extremely dangerous. But that is exactly what people have done as a result of that case. It's like, we're good, let's go. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it may be the case. It may be that the precedent that established this issue is fine, but what people are doing in response to that precedent is deeply troubling. Warrantless wiretapping. So we had this whole debate about warrantless wiretapping during the Bush administration. And I'll come back to it in a minute. But I thought the problem was solved, wasn't it? Didn't they solve that problem? Maybe they didn't. And business record surveillance. We knew that. So, for example, we knew that everyone who checked into a hotel over the course of New Year's Eve a few years ago in Las Vegas, all of their names and addresses were sent to the FBI for processing. So there's big examples of business record collection that have been publicly disclosed, but I don't think anyone appreciated the business record, like the idea that, so the law says that they're allowed to collect records if those records are relevant to an investigation. And everyone's interpretation of relevance before was that the business record actually had to be in some way relevant. And the NSA's interpretation is that if they need the business record, is therefore relevant. And so they're not allowed to collect things they don't want to collect, okay? But anything they want to collect is therefore relevant, and then they can, which is, a little bit unreasonable. But nevertheless, it is the policy that they're operating under. So you brought up another point. What did you bring up that I forgot to list here? Drones.
Obama killed it.
Okay, so there's a very good policy analyst named Benjamin Witt who works at the Brookings Institution, and he runs a blog called Lawfare. And I will mention him later. But on Lawfare, there is a post about the drone rationalization. The rationalization is that these people are in a place where they cannot be reached through other means And there is some imminent risk that they are going to attack the United States. So that's the story. It's not. They have not argued that they can drone anybody they want, whenever they want. They have argued that there's the specific. There's 3 prongs. I don't remember the third one, but there's the context in which they can do that. And you have to be in the mountains of Afghanistan somewhere, and you have to be an imminent threat to the United States, and there's some other prong. And so there's been a lot of advocacy about this issue. A lot of people are concerned about what happened, but the actual legal rationale they have, it's not. The question is really whether their definition of things like imminent threat are the same as ours, and that's really where it gets dicey. They talked about how they're changing the definition of imminence. They actually said that. So the word imminence does not mean what it means to you. The word relevant does not mean what it means to you. There's all these words that they keep using, but it turns out when you dig beneath the surface, the definition of the word they're functioning on is not the definition that everyone understands that definition to be. And that is a kind of doublespeak that is deeply troubling when it comes to these issues. It's like we've all agreed on a policy, but in fact, my understanding of what we've agreed to is not the same as everyone else's understanding of what we've agreed to. So it's a way of lying to everyone.
You've missed a huge one.
Okay.
The secret interpretation of the Patriot Act.
Well, that comes back to business record surveillance.
Not exactly.
Okay.
You keep going. I'll come up with a solid reason, but it deals with individuals also.
So there's 2 consequences. So first of all, actually, before I go on to that slide, I just want to make the observation that I think that there are a great deal of changes that have happened over the past 10 years that have a significant effect on civil liberties. And so when I talked about how civil liberties on the scaffolding can hold up in the space that allows communities like this to exist, I feel threatened. I don't feel threatened because I'm Al-Qaeda. I feel threatened because I'm someone who stands outside of what is normal behavior. And I see the value. I understand the value of doing that. And I think that is why this community is upset about this. And it's the reality is that this has consequences beyond the government's ability to investigate terrorism. And I don't think that the establishment really appreciates that those consequences will hurt them as well as they hurt us. So this is a chart who's this guy? This guy who runs 5830. You guys know this guy? I forget his name. He's this guy who got into sports statistics. He was really good at sports statistics. Yeah, Nate Silver. One of the most astute analysts of our political scene today. This guy was into sports statistics and predicting the outcomes of sporting events, and then took that knowledge and he applied it to predicting politics. And he had very accurate predictions for the previous election. So he's definitely a force to be reckoned with, and the establishment doesn't like him because everything he does is data driven and it doesn't facilitate a narrative. It's just sort of factual. And so where for example in the previous election there were a lot of people who desired the idea of this close contest between Obama and Romney. In fact, the likelihood of Romney winning that election was quite narrow. And the data showed that, and that was not something that the media really liked because it didn't create a controversy. It wasn't interesting. It was oh, it's done. And so people don't like truth. So anyway, that's right. So he did this post right after the Edward Snowden revelations, and this chart is how people in the U.S. House voted about the Patriot Act extension in 2011, and you can see that there are basically 4 quadrants of people in the House. There are establishment and anti-establishment congresspersons, and there are left and right congresspersons, and they broke down more or less on the basis of those lines. And this is what I'm getting to. So back in the 5-6 years ago when Bush was wiretapping people, there was this clear partisan divide where the liberals were up in arms about those damn Republicans and their civil liberties violated. And then the Republicans were lined up behind their man, and he's got to fight terrorism, and he's doing it right. And it was this clear partisan divide. But now that it's Obama doing the wiretapping, we have a completely different set of reaction from people, and it's actually broken up into quadrants. So we still have the same guys that are lining up behind Bush are more or less lining up behind Obama. They're consistent, proponents of state authority. So you have these establishment conservatives that support surveillance no matter who's doing it. And then you also have anti-establishment conservatives. So these are people who supported Bush when he was doing the spying, but they're opposed to Obama doing spying because they don't like Obama because he's a liberal. So you kind of have this other quadrant of the conservative party now that's concerned about the surveillance now that someone else is doing it. The exact same thing is happening on the left. So you have these liberals who were opposed to spying when it was Bush doing the spying. But now that Obama's doing the spying, it's fine because he's on their side. So these are establishment liberals, who the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, who are arguing that Bush's spying was bad, but Obama's spying is fine. And then you have anti-establishment liberals who are opposed to spying no matter who's doing it. They were opposed to spying before, and they're opposed to spying now. There are things that they're not opposed to that they probably should be, but I'll get into that in a minute. So this has been the way that this is broken down, and it's caused some interesting, arguments to be made. The arguments being made by the establishment conservatives are not that interesting because we've been hearing them for 10 years. It's like, government power good, government, whatever. The arguments of the establishment left are a little bit more interesting because we haven't been hearing them before, and now we're hearing them. And the rationalization is that what Bush was doing was illegal, but what Obama is doing is legal. And nothing could be further from the truth. What Obama is alleged to have done is much more intrusive than anything that was alleged about Bush while Bush was president. The debate that we had when Bush was president was about the surveillance of international telecommunications between people in the United States and known terrorists outside the United States, and whether or not a warrant was required to do that kind of surveillance. So it really was a technicality. Everyone agrees that the NSA should be, almost everyone agrees that the NSA should be spying on communications between Americans and people who are known to be terrorists. That's understood to be okay. The question is whether or not they followed the process to get a warrant when they were doing that. And if they're not following the process to get a warrant, are there additional phone calls that they're sweeping up that don't actually fit that description? So that's a pretty narrow debate. What Obama is accused of is spying on all of you and every single person in the United States, all innocent American citizens. That's a completely different thing. It's categorically different. It's got a much broader scope, and it's a greater concern ultimately. And so if you were pissed off as hell that Bush was not getting warrants for his targeting surveillance of terrorists, 4 or 5 years ago or whatever it was, you ought to be pissed off that Obama is spying on everyone in the United States. Furthermore, the argument that what Obama is doing is legal is highly questionable, and I have this list of people who are raising questions about that. One of them, and it just infuriates me when I see these people who are like, Obama's not breaking the law. So Jim Sensenbrenner is the guy who wrote the Patriot Act. And he says, that I authored the Patriot Act, and this is abuse of the law. He filed a FOIA request on the ACLU's lawsuit over this issue a couple weeks ago, and he said that he was not aware of the metadata surveillance when he reauthorized the Patriot Act in 2011, and if he was aware of it, that he would not have voted in favor of doing so. So you have a congressman arguing that he was lied to, and he would not have voted for the legislation that he voted to if he knew the truth. All right? Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Orrin Kerr is one of my favorite law professors on the planet. He's an expert on the Fourth Amendment, who writes eloquently about it all the time. He said it was surprising and troubling if the law was being interpreted in the way they are apparently interpreting it, and has continued to criticize the way that the government is interpreting these things. So I mentioned Benjamin Wentz, who supports the drone program, okay? So certainly not a left-wing liberal. Benjamin Witt says, it is simply different and grander in scope and scale from anything that we had thought the law meant, which is a very nice, qualified way of saying it's fucking illegal. All right, and again, not a left-wing liberal saying something like that. This guy is and certainly a highly qualified expert on national security policy. And of course, so Jennifer Granick and Christopher Sprigman are Jennifer Granick works for the EFF, so we know what side they're on, right? So you can discount them if you want, but they have been very clear that no statute explicitly authorized mass surveillance. So if your opinion is that Obama did not break the law, there's a lot of very smart people from across the political spectrum that do not agree with that, and they know what they're talking about. Was there a question?
Did you already go across the part where you explain how we get the government to follow their own laws?
No, because I don't know what that is. So
it worked last time.
The other side of this coin that is kind of frustrating me is the anti-establishment left, and that is so the other side of this coin is, so clearly there's been some things revealed here that the government was doing that they shouldn't have been doing. But people want to have this narrative be not about what the government did, but about Snowden. And I actually don't give a fuck about Snowden because I didn't vote for him and I'm not in control of his actions. It doesn't really matter. I care what the government did because that's the institution that we're, all inherently a part of. If Snowden turns out to be an asshole, it doesn't really matter. But everyone is concerned about whether this guy is a hero or a criminal. And I don't think it's that simple. All right. Well, I don't think it's simple. Criminal. I think he did certain things that were useful. I think he also disclosed other things that he probably shouldn't have disclosed. So consider the PRISM program. The PRISM program is exactly what you would have expected if you understood federal policy. Yes, they're going to Facebook and getting the Facebook accounts of people who are suspected to be terrorists. And you would expect Facebook to be collaborating with them to do that. And the problem is that the chart shows which social networking sites they have strong connections with. So if you want to make it hard for them or expensive for them to spy on you, you can choose to use a site like Meme Streams that wasn't on the PRISM chart. It's a little shameless. No, I'm just kidding. So I would fold like a house of cards if the NSA showed up at my house and wanted someone's Meme Stream. Anyway.
Thanks, Tom.
At least he's honest.
Just kidding.
Why do we have problems if someone as opinionated as you will fold for them?
They have gone.
I'm just being sarcastic. So I mean, basically, if you're a terrorist, you should not use Facebook. You should use some little social networking site that didn't show up on that list. And that information is useful to those people. So clearly, by disclosing it, Snowden helped them to a certain extent. So it is reasonable for people to be angry at Snowden, but at the same time, he disclosed things that the government is doing that they shouldn't be doing, and it's reasonable to be angry at the government for that. It is possible to both love and hate Edward Snowden at the same time, but people they can't process that. He must either be black or white. He must be good or bad, and people cannot comprehend the idea that human beings are complicated and they do things that are both stupid and noble.
People that are married should understand.
My wife has learned many things from our relationship. I certainly am capable of doing things that are both stupid and noble. I
see something, say something. Something! It goes on, turn in your neighbor.
Yeah.
It goes on.
Yeah.
And two-tier justice system.
Yeah, so I'm really concerned about this Edward. So there's two problems that have occurred. I'm actually getting ahead of myself. One of them is that all conspiracy theories are now true, okay?
I told you so.
Everybody,
Just say it. Every tinfoil hat.
honestly,
Just say it.
I'm gonna get there. So, honestly, there's all these people who are like, you all knew the NSA was spying on everybody. Why are you acting so surprised? And it's because in good company, one did not admit such things, okay? Previously, there were all kinds of people who alleged this kind of stuff was going on. There were a lot of people who believed that it was true, but nobody had any proof. And so in proper company, one did not admit that such things were going on. And now there is proof. And so that guy that you might have dismissed as a wacko conspiracy theorist said, that's not really happening. That's just crazy shit that someone heard on Art Bell.
But
it turns out it's actually real. It's true. It
They screwed up and said, no, he's not just a conspiracy theorist, but they did it.
Yeah.
They admitted they
Yeah, no,
lied.
you're right. They should never have admitted it. They should have just dismissed all of it. But they said that it was true. And so the problem is that every other crackpot out there who says that, so for example, on the one hand, if the government, or if someone revealed that there actually were aliens in Area 51, there would be someone making the argument that we have no right to be angry because we all knew that there were aliens in Area 51 the entire time. And so there's no reason for anyone to be shocked by this. What the fuck is the matter with you people? So on the other side of that coin is that, in fact, you cannot dismiss the guy who says that there are Area 51 or aliens in Area 51 in the exact same way that you might have dismissed him 6 months ago. Okay? 6 months ago, all these things were crazy conspiracy theories, but now you gotta say, oh, I don't know, dude, you might be right about that. And so, yes, when I said that aliens were going to eat everyone at PhreakNIC, you can't dismiss that anymore, right? That's the bottom line. It's entirely possible that that's going to happen, and now you can no longer dismiss me as a crackpot. Because all these other crackpot theories have been proven to be true.
I don't think that's how it works.
Even a broken clock is right twice a day.
I'm not a doctor, but
Only
It's
analog,
statistical
digital
chance.
ones just don't show nothing.
Playing analog.
I'm a doctor, Jim, not a conspiracy theorist.
So that was, I said there were two problems. One of them is all the conspiracy theories are now true. The other one is that they've made it very clear that there is a two-tier justice system, okay? So you have this guy, James Clapper, who said that, who was asked under oath in the Senate if they were spying on everyone in the country, and he said, not wittingly, is what he said, not wittingly. And I mean, he might be a great guy, he might be an excellent public servant, everything he's doing might be really, really useful. But he fucking lied under oath in front of everybody, and it's really clear that he did that. So you have to prosecute him. So they had this guy, Roger Clemens, a baseball player. He said under oath, when no one was paying attention, that he didn't use steroids, okay? And they prosecuted him for it. Now, he beat the rap because he's a millionaire, and that's how you get out of, that's another aspect of our multi-tier justice system. If you're rich enough, you can get out of whatever. But, the fact is that they prosecuted him. They have not prosecuted James Clapper, and they're not going to. And again, I feel bad for James Clapper. He was in a bad position, whatever. He did what he could do. But the reality is that if we don't prosecute him, we are sending a very clear message that yes, there is a two-tier justice system, and the rules that apply to Roger Clemens do not apply to James Clapper because he's one of us. So I mean, the reality is that a lot of, not only are all conspiracies real, but the whole concept of, a lot of people felt that the system was unfair, but now you have proof. You have proof. You have proof that Obama is a liar. So who are you going to vote for? If you were pissed off about this stuff before under the Bush administration, like I was, okay, come on, I talked about it a lot here. And you voted for somebody because you thought that they would do a better job managing that, like there's somebody who said that they weren't going to do so. And then it turns out that was all bullshit. Obama cannot run for office claiming to be a Democrat and then get into office and say, I got up this morning and I was thinking that I've decided I'm a Republican, and just proceed to govern as a Republican for the following 4 years. That's not how this fucking works. Normal people like you and I, we can change our minds. We have the right to change our opinions. But when you get elected by the people under a platform, you're responsible for what you told people you were going to do.
But the Supreme Court has ruled the campaign pledges are protected speech.
They have.
Tom, why did you re-elect him when he was up for re-election?
You're blaming
Something
God.
about 47%. It's a long story.
No, if Obama had changed his mind and said he was Republican, he would be being honest. And our political system isn't based on honesty, it's based on deceit.
I see no choice but to vote for a libertarian in the next election, personally.
Should have voted last time for libertarian.
Perhaps I should. All the criticisms are fair. But the issue is that I don't think these guys have any credibility anymore. And again, before no one really trusted them. but it was this sort of polite society thing where everyone thinks they're full of shit, but they vote for them anyway. But now it's actually out in the open that they are in fact full of shit, and you can't really deny it. It's proven that they're full of shit, so what are you gonna do? And I think what Nate Silver was saying with this chart is that he's actually predicting that there will be significant political consequences associated with this. That some of these third parties will be surprisingly more vibrant in the next election cycle as a consequence of this. And it remains to be seen, but I think that more or less that's what he's saying, that this is opened a rift in our political world that was not visible before, that was shrouded under partisanship. And so, be that a good thing or a bad thing or whatever, I think that it either will have consequences or it won't. And if it has consequences, it'll have these kind of consequences where I'm going to stand up and I'm not going to be mic'd, but this distinction will matter more than this one.
That mic is portable. Use your technology, Tom.
I'm too drunk. All right, so fucking Christ. They monitored the content of every text message and email that was sent in the city of Salt Lake during the Olympics in 2002.
That's Mormons.
I bet that was horrible.
Well, they probably have an algorithm for figuring out who's married, and it probably just didn't work in that city. Either his wife has 8 cell phones or something is wrong with our algorithm. Sorry, I know I'm insured.
Then the same year that Greece found out all their politicians' phones were compromised.
That was a different Olympics, because I think it was the following Summer Olympics were in Greece, or the earlier Summer Olympics. I don't remember which year.
They haven't copped up to that one yet.
Salt Lake City was winter.
What? No, what I'm saying is the Greece thing was summer.
Greece was 2004, summer.
Okay, so yes, that would have been the following Summer Games. So perhaps
Nobody copped up to it.
that's very interesting. That's a very interesting observation, because now we're saying that we surveilled the shit out of the Winter Olympics in 2002, and we know that there was some shit that went down with surveillance in 2004.
To the point where the tech committed suicide.
Yeah, the tech committed suicide, or he was murdered.
Allegedly committed.
Remember, all conspiracy theories are now confirmed.
Elvis and Tupac.
So that's an interesting observation. It increases the likelihood that we had something to do with it. When we had a debate about surveillance during the Bush administration, we talked about this narrow program, and it was a problem because they weren't respecting the law. It was not a problem because of what they said they were doing. What they said they were doing is spying on communications with known terrorists, which is fine. The question is, how do you establish that you actually know that person is a terrorist, and did you do it to some standard of law, or do you have some check and balance that make sure that you did so? Those things are important, but what they fundamentally underlying thing that they said they were doing was not really the problem. It was whether or not the Bush administration really respected the rule of law was the issue. Okay? This is a totally different, categorically different kind of thing. And the Fourth Amendment clearly prohibits this, okay? There is no way on the fucking planet that this is legal. This is broad-based surveillance of the content of Americans' communications. None of the rationalizations for the NSA surveillance program that Edward Snowden revealed apply to this. Okay? This is off the fucking reservation. And we did not have a debate about this during the Bush administration. We didn't talk about this and decide that it was resolved. So all these people who are like, well, we had this debate about warrantless wiretapping during Bush, and everyone knows that Bush was engaged in warrantless wiretapping, and it's water under the bridge because it's all dealt with. Bullshit. This was never discussed.
I keep hearing.
It wasn't discussed, but it did exist.
I keep hearing this argument.
Just like
that it's okay to collect the data if they don't look at it. And that seems like pointless argument.
Yeah.
I mean, if the computer looks at the data.
So first of all, they were arguing that they did not collect the data before. Now they're arguing that they do collect the data, but they're not looking at it. Do you trust them?
Well, no. It goes further. It's like they can only look at it if they're closely supervised, and then it's
we always find out when they look at it and they're not closely supervised, and we even have a term for it when they spy on their, their girlfriend.
Oh yeah, love it.
Right. Love it.
Yeah.
I think as soon as they collect the data, it's fine. It doesn't matter if someone looks at it.
So this was an argument that was actually made by Richard Posner, who's a appellate court judge, a very influential one, someone who would be a potential Supreme Court justice if he wasn't such a loudmouth. And he wrote this opinion back in 2006 that said that if a computer reads your email, then that's not a violation of your privacy because a computer doesn't care about your underwear. That a computer is only interested in evidence of a crime. And so he basically created this whole rationalization that computer-based searches weren't a violation of privacy. That if computers read your email or listen to your phone calls, that you might not fear this because it's just a computer and the computer is emotionless. And that if the computer found enough information in scanning your email or listening to your calls that it thought that it was worth elevating to a human, that created a standard of suspicion. And so now we're not doing suspicionless surveillance. The active surveillance happens when the human gets access to it, and at that point it's been filtered by the machine. So
bootstrap.
This was an argument I made of PhreakNIC. Okay, here's my prediction that I made at a previous PhreakNIC that is now coming true. I predicted that robots would be breaking your house and searching through your property because you have no expectation of privacy with respect to robots that search your house. Okay? And it's exactly the same rationalization. What?
We're just waiting for a way to say it. Just say it.
Aliens?
No, I told you so.
I told you so.
Yes!
Cheers.
So yeah, I mean the bottom line is that I don't know who the fuck to vote for anymore. I'm honestly pretty dejected because obviously no one gives a fuck about the Constitution. I mean, come on. Thank you, sir. Cheers. Hey, no. Thank you. I give a fuck about the Constitution, but my establishment does not. They see it as a bureaucratic. They see it the same way I see their fucking their forms I gotta fill out. They see it as this formality that they gotta deal with. They don't deeply understand and respect the reasons that it exists. And so, if they out of the need to do what they need to do feel that they need to ignore it, then that's what they're gonna do. And there's no institution within our system that's gonna hold them accountable. They're not gonna charge James Clapper with perjury, and nothing's gonna happen. They have this panel that they put together that's this gold star panel of experts who are going to evaluate whether or not they did something wrong. And on this panel they put two national security hawks. One of them's Richard Clark, who many of you may have read before. He's a cybersecurity guy, but he's obviously not like a civil libertarian, right? And then they got this guy who's a liberal paternalist. Okay? And that is exactly what it sounds like. Somebody who thinks that the government ought to direct you to intelligent choices that you can't make for yourself. Yes. This person is a law professor who really believes he's like Rush Limbaugh's conspiracy theory materialized, okay? He's someone who really believes that the government is there to sort of parrot you along and set you on the right track and pat you on the head and tell you what to do. Genuinely, that's what he thinks.
Was Matt the Ford construction manual for it?
You didn't look at American and see how they need to
his wife, incidentally, is the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Cass Sustine, and then you've got this guy who's this is interesting. He's a law professor at a university in Illinois. He's a big Obama booster and has already gone public with the idea that Obama, again, did not break the law. Because everything Obama's doing is legal, but that Bush guy, he was a criminal. So he's gone public with that point of view that everything's fine and there is no problem, which is clearly why he was appointed to this Gold Star panel to review. You know what I'm saying? So the problem is that he's on the ACLU's advisory board. And so the ACLU, it's funny because he's actually made public arguments that the ACLU is arguing against in court with respect to this issue. But because he happens to be there, and it's fine, their advisory board can have a bunch of divergent views. They want different perspectives. They want somebody to tell them that they're being too radical. So, perhaps they have him on their advisory board for that reason. But, it gives him the appearance of being a civil libertarian when he in fact is not. There is only one person on this panel that I think will provide a reasonable point of view, and his name is Peter Swire. Peter Swire was active on the border search issue, and he is actually the author of this thing called IAPP. How many of you know what an IAPP certification is? It's the International Association of Privacy Professionals. So if you want to be like a chief privacy officer at a company, and it's actually funny from the computer security perspective, most of it, you don't have to be a lawyer to get it, but most of it has to do with teaching lawyers how to do computer security. So most of the people in this room could probably pass this certification quite easily and get a job as a chief privacy officer somewhere. But it has to do with what the laws are that constrain the use of private information, which many of you probably understand inherently very well. So he wrote the test material that you have to learn in order to get that certification. So he's definitely a credible privacy expert, and is concerned about government overreach. So of the 5 people, I'm looking forward to reading his minority report from this panel. So that's their gold star that they're going to put on themselves, that they did everything right, and things are just going to go on. So. I'm really dejected because I think that some of these principles are important. I think that we have institutions in this country that try to uphold them, like the Supreme Court, and in this case, it's more or less been revealed that we don't care. And so that, again, all conspiracy theories are true. All apathy is now reasonable. All cynicism, is now mainstream. It's the way that we need to think about things, and that's very disheartening to me. So the only thing that I can argue is not disheartening is this, and this is something that Aesthetics posted on his Twitter feed. So if you're listening out there, Aesthetics, thank you very much. And these are things that the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court has declassified since Edward Snowden's disclosure. And it is a ton of material about the actual proceedings of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which were not available to the public before. So if anyone tells you that this hasn't had a consequence from a legal standpoint, they're full of shit. It has had huge consequences. It has made the process more transparent. It has allowed us to have more visibility. I don't know if it's really changed what's happening, but at least we're no longer having the court system dismiss the arguments that are being made on the basis of the fact that it's a secret and we can't talk about it. So maybe, as a consequence of all of this stuff coming out, we will reach a point where we actually have someone like the Supreme Court deciding that this was not legal. And if we get there, then that will be a positive step. But it remains to be seen. And at this point, I'm very cynical. So I don't know. Those are my remarks. And you had your hand up, sir.
FASA has existed since 78 or 79, correct?
Maybe even earlier than that, but yeah, 70s, sometime in the 70s.
And between then and now, have we ever gotten anything out of it? It's always been behind the black curtain, right?
So let me explain a couple things. So there's 2 court rulings that you need to understand. One was in the 60s and one was in the 70s. In the 60s, there was a ruling that so this 4th Amendment does not say that a warrant is required to surveil people, okay? This is very important. The 4th Amendment does not require warrants. The 4th Amendment says that you should be secure against unreasonable searches and seizures. And what is what's a reasonable search and seizure? Well, whatever the fuck we decide, all right? It's a fucking loophole you could fly a 747 through. So what happened in the 60s is that the court decided that any search that was performed for an intelligence purpose was presumptively reasonable. And so this is how Watergate ended up happening. Basically, you had this group of people who were basically like deputized to break into people's houses, listen for phone calls, do whatever the fuck they wanted, because all of their activity was presumptively reasonable. And so where this came to a head is when they broke into the fucking offices of the opposing political party, which is really where shit gets fucked up. Okay? That actually happened. And so that's why they fucking tried to impeach Nixon, right? Because, yes, they were breaking into all these foreign powers, and then eventually they got to the point where they broke into their opposing political parties' offices. So that's what happened, and so they created. So two things happened. First of all, they had a Supreme Court ruling that said that intelligence activity that is targeted at people that are, well, if you're a foreign power, if I think you're a spy that works for the Chinese, then I can spy on you without a warrant. That if you're an American, I have to get a warrant to spy on you, even if I'm doing it for national security reasons. So that's a ruling from 1972. In the past 3 months, I found a guy who's a professor at the Naval War College arguing that Supreme Court decision was wrong, and it is the inherent problem with everything, that our system should require a warrant for intelligence activity that's targeted at Americans. There are people who really are angry that the Supreme Court requires the intelligence agencies to get a warrant when they target Americans. There is a faction that believes that. So, understand that. But the FISA court was basically the Congress saying that, okay, the Constitution allows the CIA to spy on foreign powers, but we want to create a process for that anyway, because obviously it's gone too far. And so that's what the FISA court is there to do. It's like, so the Constitution, so this is where when Bush was charged with spying illegally, there was this argument that it was constitutional but illegal. So the constitutional idea is that the Constitution doesn't prohibit the surveillance, but there's this law that requires him to get a warrant from the FISA court, and he broke the law. So it's illegal what he did, but it was constitutional. So the FISA court was created to rein in the intelligence organizations and require them to go to a court and say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. It's not the Democratic Party headquarters, it's actually Chinese spies, and this is why. And so it may be the case that they approve most of the stuff that goes before them because they're not getting a lot of stuff that's questionable. But the problem is that clearly in their little secret chamber where no one gets to review what they're saying, they've drifted to the point where they're agreeing to things they shouldn't be agreeing to.
I was just going to ask you to say every time you said FISA, please precede it with the secret FISA court, please.
I will try to remember to do that. So I mean, a lot of people, as a consequence of this, have been talking about how to reform the secret FISA court so that it has better processes, and that is a positive development as well. And so again, I can't say that the consequences of Edward Snowden's disclosures have been entirely negative. Some of them have been positive. Again, it's possible for people to be simultaneously heroes and stupid. And so, I mean, there are things there are consequences of his actions that have been positive. That is an undeniable fact. And the potential reform of this FISA court to make it a better check and balance on the intelligence institutions would be a positive thing, and maybe could restore faith. What I'll tell you is not going to fucking restore faith is our gold star panel of 5 individuals, only one of which has any credibility with respect to the subject. Okay? So, I mean, I don't know. I remain cynical, but I have some hope. That's my talk. Thank you for listening to me. I hope it was interesting. Let's get going. And again, thank you also for your support for our Wiki Voter Guide. And if any of you is really, really deeply interested in the subject and wants to get involved, let me know, because I honestly have not put enough effort into it, and I think that I think that it has potential, if you have time and you care about the problem, then let me know, and I'd be happy to work with you. Thank you.
Hey, so I have some experiences that I feel compelled to share.
Okay. Well, do you want to use the microphone?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, we are not a. Yeah, go ahead.
So I
Flip the switch. It's in the top part there.
Hi. So I used to work doing surveillance as my job, and I did that for 2 years.
What do you know about
in what context?
I did corporate surveillance, so
Okay.
I didn't do the fancy, cool stuff.
Me too, buddy.
So I wanted.
In fact, many of the people in the room here do corporate surveillance. That's a difference.
I wanted to talk about the mindset of surveillance, because there are some arguments for a blasé attitude in the face of surveillance. I don't think anyone here in this room makes, but I think a lot of people have encountered. For example, why would anybody spy on me because my life is really boring? And so my experiences doing surveillance are that there are people who really enjoy watching your life, and there are just people who it really gets them off, like watching people's private lives, and I've met people like that. And I also...
And they're attracted to that profession.
Right. And so when you're doing surveillance, it's really easy to not do anything. If you have a job doing surveillance, you can do fucking nothing and say, well, I didn't see anything interesting. And you can do that.
All clear, sir.
Yeah, you can do that for a long time. And so people that work doing surveillance will make up things to find. Their jobs are so boring that they will come up with stories and apply them to the things they see, because your lives are so boring. And so that way, if they're wrong, they can go to their boss and, well, no, if they're right, they can go to their boss and say, look what I found, look how diligent I am, look how good I am at surveillance, and impress their supervisor with their diligence doing surveillance. And if they're wrong, they can say, well, I was wrong, but at least I documented it in the logs, and I didn't do anything against our policies. And maybe they find something else, something that ends up getting somebody fired, which I saw, or if it doesn't get somebody fired, it ends up becoming gossip within the surveillance department and negatively impacts people's careers, because that gossip ends up going to the leadership in a company, and the person in question never finds out that they are being gossiped about based on surveillance about them. And so I just wanted to point out that when the comment comes up, about the 2002 Salt Lake Olympics, someone said, oh, that must have been so hard looking through all those text messages. Well, no, because there are people that are super interested in those text messages and come up with stories about why those text messages are interesting. And so you don't get to decide what that story is.
Thank you for your remarks. So I think that a huge thing that people need to contemplate is the self-perpetuating nature of these things, where if your job is to be a surveillance guy, then you have to justify the cost that you have to the system by finding things that are of interest and rationalizing the idea of expanding what it is that you do. In a commercial marketplace, people are trying to build their companies and grow what they're doing. People who are engaged in this activity are trying to grow it as well. And so there's this need to identify things and to justify and to expand that has a big impact on what we end up seeing. This is an argument that was made by some of the reporters at the New York Times who have been tracking this thing over the past decade, that basically there's lots of different ways to fight terrorism, but this is the one that we really know how to do well, and we understand how to do it, we understand how to fund it, and we understand how to articulate to Congress that we need to do it, and so that's what we're getting. We're getting surveillance because that's what we're good at. And there may be other things that we're not as good at that would be effective as well, that we're not investing in, because it's just not how what we do. It's just not the people that are out there asking for funding. So, ma'am?
Yeah, I told the Statics that you were giving him a shout out.
Oh, yeah.
And he says to tell you to mention nymrights.org, please.
Okay, well, Aesthetics would like me to mention nimrights.org, which has to do with your pseudonymity on the internet, so that you can participate in discussions online without necessarily having your true name associated with those political discussions in the NSA's database. So,
He gave a talk last night.
he did give a talk yesterday, yeah.
On the phone today.
Oh, did he?
He did, he Skyped it in. So I worry that this conference, many of you have seen Real Genius, I hope, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it starts out that someone begins to bring a tape recorder to the class, and then other people bring a tape recorder to the class, and eventually the professor brings a tape player to the class, and then the guy shows up, and there's no people in the room. There's a tape player and a bunch of tape recorders, and so with aesthetics now presenting remotely, I fear that eventually this will become a virtual conference.
As long as the beer is real.
Nice. That should be the slogan for PhreakNIC.
At least the beer is real.
At least the beer's real.
But one of the good arguments against the, well, I have nothing to hide, is yes, it might be boring to you, but like anyone who knows me knows I'm into guns. And there was one week where, yes, I took my lunch break, I went down to the store and bought 1,500 rounds of ammo.
Terrorist! Terrorist!
Sounds like a whole lot.
Murderer.
That was 3 boxes.
Terrorist!
Big boxes.
Yes.
Terrorist times 3!
Well, it was of 22s, which are very small rounds.
Were they half off at least?
Cop killer.
No, this was before this past December, so it was still 22s were still cheap.
Baby killer!
There was a back-to-school special at Walmart.
Yeah.
You think he's joking?
It was the whole thing of I owed a buddy some ammo, and I was going to a marksmanship class that required at least 600, and 22s come in boxes of 500. But to someone who doesn't know guns, oh my God, he bought 1,500 rounds. That sounds like a lot.
We're going to need more than that for the revolution.
Oh God, yes.
Yeah, the same idea when a lot of people were saying, oh, Bush is fine and everything. I'm like, here's 3 words for you. President Hillary Clinton. And that scared the shit out of a lot of them because it's not, sure, it's great if your guy's in charge, but what if somebody that you might not agree with their political opinions has the same power?
Yeah, and it's funny to see that play out, right? Because you've had it on both sides now. You've got these Republicans who are okay with Bush surveilling, but now that Obama's doing it, they're pissed off. And at the same token, you have these guys who are pissed off that Bush was surveilling. But now that Obama's doing it, they're like, it's legal, it's fine. What are you freaking out about? And it's amazing how partisanship affects people's thinking.
Or the actual argument. Well, Bush did it.
The reality is that most of the people involved in this stuff are the same people that were involved in it before. The political switchover has little consequence.
The whole issue is related to partisanship. When people will make that argument, I haven't done anything wrong, I don't have anything to hide. Well, just like Nixon wanted to go break into the opposing party's offices, just because they wanted that little slight, tiny edge to know what their next move was in that chess game that was being played. Anything and everything you do will be valuable if it moves into that arena of partisanship. Even though what you're doing, if you go back to your first thing, is normal and it's legal and it's not malicious, but if it's working against somebody else in the partisanship scale, then all of a sudden you're worth spying on.
That's another line in the sand. Honestly, that's a good observation. Yeah, it's true.
No, it's like the Ingress thing. It becomes the blues and the greens.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the biggest concerns I see is that it shuts down people speaking up. I mean, I don't have anything I got to worry about. Anybody can talk about, but nobody wants to talk to reporters. Nobody wants to talk to anybody else because now we know that you can find out who's talking to who.
Right. So this is it. So let me talk about. Can I talk about that for a minute? That's very. Yeah. There's actually like a lot of depth to the observation you just made, and that is so. there's this whole Fourth Amendment discussion about whether, this is, so like I said, the Fourth Amendment prohibits unreasonable searches. And so we have to decide whether or not we think this is reasonable or unreasonable. And that's there's a wide variety of different opinions that can come under the banner of what you think the word reasonable or unreasonable means. So there's another aspect to this, which is the First Amendment issue, which is that the First Amendment protects your right to freedom of association. And so what is it that a metadata database of telephone calls actually is? It's not really your expressions, it's your associations, it's who you're communicating with. And so the question is can you have a situation where it's possible for the government to collect the database of every person you associate with, but you simultaneously have freedom of association? It's possible to conceive of that, but it's you're really on the line in terms of what you can accept. Generally speaking, with respect to the First Amendment, we have this concept of chilling effects, where if people are afraid to speak their minds, or if I don't want to go up to PhreakNIC and say what I think because I think there are going to be consequences of that, then that's a problem, right? Even if the things that I'm going to say, I'm not prohibited from actually doing that. If I'm afraid of speaking my mind and the political process breaks down because I have to be allowed to be wrong. That's the bottom line. I got to be allowed to come here and say some shit that later on I'm like, yeah, that was bullshit. I was wrong. You know what I'm saying? And if I can't do that, if I'm afraid of saying something that I later regret, because people are going to come create consequences for me, or if I'm afraid of saying something that is true that I don't regret, but because people are going to create consequences for me, then that limits our ability to have these conversations. And so I thought about it this way. It's like, let's say that, you decide to associate with someone who's involved in a political issue because you agree with them, but then later in the future, they go and they take it too far, they become radicalized, they commit some crime, now you're associated with them because you called them, you talked to them, and it's in the database. So if the government decides to start investigating them because they became radicalized and did something crazy, they're going to come up with your name. And so now you got to think, like, not only, is it okay for me to talk to that person now because of who they are today? You got to think, 5 years from now, is that person going to do something stupid? And do I really want to be associated with that person 5 years from now when they do something stupid? And you might decide to self-censor. You might decide, I'm not gonna interact with that dude because I don't know where he's gonna go. You know what I'm saying? And that has a negative impact on your freedom of association. At this point, you're self-censoring your associations with people because you're concerned about the consequences that could happen for something that happens in the future. And I think that to me is a clearer constitutional issue with the concept of metadata records retention than the Fourth Amendment one. I think there's a lot of people who have decided that the metadata is not content, and so you don't really have a reasonable privacy expectation to it. And if we accept that argument, which I don't necessarily accept that argument, but if we do, that doesn't eliminate this important First Amendment concern, which is that I ought to be able to talk to whoever I want to, and I ought not have to be afraid of that. So thank you for bringing that up. It's a pretty big issue, and there's actually a lot of depth to it, and there's that issue is being adjudicated now. There's a court. So the ACLU is a lawsuit where they filed, and they have a variety of different arguments they've made, and they made that First Amendment argument. So that will get considered by the court system through the process. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
The one thing I want
We'll use the mic. Okay. Just, you had mentioned D&I James Clapper, and when he testified, he said not wittingly, which accounts for perjury pretty much. So, but is there no senator that would prosecute him? Out of the 100 we have, everyone's like, we understand, no problem, sorry to bother you. How can our elected leaders, they don't, they're in bed with their own, of course, which, there's no accountability.
Some of your elected leaders are and some of them aren't. And then you got to ask this other question is, how much dirt do they have on XYZ elected leader that isn't? Which is another serious concern.
Right, I guess. It's just, if somebody can get up there and, wiggle and squirm and be like, oh, well, whatever we're doing is what we want, and the senator's like, yeah, okay, we agree, no problem, sorry to bother you. That's a problem. Like,
I agree. I mean, and again, like Clapper could be a great guy, and he ended up in a bad situation. It doesn't matter. You clearly committed perjury in front of everyone in the country. It's very visible. If we care about the rule of law, the judge can make a decision that we're going to slap you on the wrist at the end of the day. But I'm very concerned about the idea that we're just not going to prosecute that because.
Well, right, and that's my point. There's no envelope anymore.
It creates an environment where it's okay for the intelligence community to lie in Congress, and that's actually the environment they want. That it's okay for them to lie to us, and I mean, part of what they do is deception. I understand that this is difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is that they cannot be completely forthcoming about everything that they're doing, but. This creates a difficult challenge, and deciding that we're not going to uphold the rule of law is not the right fucking answer to that challenge.
To go back to the topic of what he was talking about, the freedom of association, bring that into the real world. They're not doing one hop, they're doing two hops. And so you might associate with someone, that person associated with someone else. You don't know this other person, but that's your quote-unquote terrorist. Yeah. And now you're dragged in.
Yeah. 3 degrees of separation, I guess, is how far they said they were going.
Yeah,
so
but 2 is absolutely confirmed.
You're all 1 degree from me, and so you're all fucked. Yeah, I'm just going to be clear about that.
On the topic of self-censorship, if you're interested in that issue, Wendy Seltzer runs this excellent website called chillingeffects.org.
Yes, she does.
Yeah. That has a lot of good stories about self-censorship.
It does.
You can submit stories to it.
And you should search that site for the name Billy Hoffman if you... There's very interesting content up there about it. And in fact, I think that my name is also on that website. A certain electronics manufacturer once tried to sue me. Anyway, sir.
So in around, I think it was in the 50s, when the OSS and the CIA and all that stuff was getting started, they found out that in Indonesia they could get the whole culture, as far as the political leaders going, based on blackmail and based on having all these secrets. They said that the whole society would have safes full of documents that would incriminate the other one, and each politician was just sort of pitted against the next based on all these dark secrets that they could each dredge up on the next. And it seems like with what's happened lately, that our whole society it's sort of been turned on each individual to say, we can do that to you based on us storing all your data indefinitely into the future. But another thing I think that's very important when we're talking about the Constitution and we're talking about all this stuff as far as philosophy of government and self-governance and this and that, is that the authority of the Constitution resides within the people, and it's very clear that there's not any authority, including the Navy itself, that has every bit of the military under it, that doesn't come from the people giving that government that authority to have that Navy and have that authority to go and kill and exact justice on behalf of what we feel is right. And I guess I'm just pointing that out as a fact of say we are self-empowered. We are not someone who has to answer to that, because that has clearly gone rogue and it has clearly gone in a direction that is anti-human. And so I'm just putting that.
So there's this idea that is promoted by certain people that is the idea of the unitary executive. The idea that the executive branch, and I mean there is some truth to the fact that the executive branch needs to be able to engage in intelligence activities. I mean that's a given. And they may need a certain amount of autonomy and independence with respect to decision making as far as that's concerned. I like to think that we have a system of checks and balances and that are constraints on that sort of behavior. But the other side of the coin is the argument that in order to be effective, the executive needs to be more or less independent with respect to those sorts of things. All of that might be fine if the executive was constrained by you. If the executive was genuinely beholden to the people. And this goes back to where I started, which is the concern that our political system has become so dominated by the finance campaigns that we don't really have a fair contest where people are making objective choices about who they want in office. We have a situation where people who are well-funded have the voice to reach the people, and people who are not well-funded are not able to to compete. And so as a consequence, the people that are getting elected are not really being chosen by the people, they're being chosen by the funders. If that is the case, then the funders are really in control. And so again, this executive who's supposed to be beholden to the people is not beholden to the people. He's beholden to these funders. And so these funders are really the ones who are deciding what is and is not acceptable from an intelligence standpoint. They are the ones who will bring consequences if they decide that the executive has gone too far. So I might be willing to countenance a certain amount of independence for the executive with respect to intelligence collection, and I agree that's very important. But my concern is that we simultaneous to all this debate about civil liberties and intelligence collection is this other problem that we have where it's not entirely clear that the political leadership that we have is beholden to the people. And that problem is really at the heart of, and that's where Lessig is talking about root strikers. That is really the heart of the whole issue. And if we felt that the political system genuinely represented the will of the people, then perhaps we would be more comfortable with the things that it is engaged in.
Right, and what I'm saying is that we don't have to answer to that is because it's not. Okay, so what I'm saying is
that if that's not beholden to the people, we are beholden to ourselves. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, as far as that, like that's something that the entire world is identifying. The very key players, be it Lindsey Graham, John McCain, Obama, Hillary, whoever it is that wants to get up there and lie to us that week, the entire world is identifying these characters. And it's not about the individual people that are out here being forced to, be divided and conquered every week. We have our own interests in mind, and we are going to absolutely show them with a lot of fortitude what our intentions are.
I hope you're right. I hope that are willing to have some fortitude with respect to this. I hope that people understand that there's been a bunch of bullshit that's been shoved down their throat, and they're willing to say that I don't want to be lied to by these people. That I hope that people say that they want to be in charge, and it remains to be seen. But Nate Silver, again, is probably one of our best analysts of political issues in this country today, and he seemed to be implying with this chart that there was a new fault line that was becoming apparent within our political system, and that people were not going to simply lie down and take this, and that's critical. That people do have enough self-respect that they expect the government to be clear with them about what they are and are not doing, and if we stand up and say that we expect certain things, then we will get them, and everything will be fine. But if people decide that that they have no agency and that they're powerless, then they will be run right over.
It's a choice. It's a very clear choice.
Right, it's a choice that each person makes.
Right. Absolutely. Cheers to that.
Prosts.
Good job.
All right, are we done talking, or we're drinking now? Let's drink. Fuck yeah.
If you were to sum up this last year in 4 words, what would they be?
Holy motherfucking shit.
Justice, will you say happy birthday to Nathan? It's his birthday.
Holy shit. It's your birthday?
Everybody should give him a drink for his birthday.
Every day is his birthday.
Is this true or false, sir?
And not just that, he's getting married.
Game over, man.
To a lady. That's true. It's not a Nathan.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Nathan. Happy birthday to you.
And now the spanking.
It is also Wild Child's birthday, so I'm going to put a shout out for that, even though he's on here. Why do you have the mic, Drew?
I'm being the mic bitch in case someone wants to talk. Run and hand them the mic.
Totally different. We're totally not getting sued.
We're gonna get sued for that song.
We'll edit it out in post.
Good.